One unanswered text is all it took for you. And now we're pulling up old messages and we're building a case file as to decide if this is real or if this is fake. You go from checking the messages to calling witnesses from the stand in your own girls group chat to checking his tone and making sure everything is aligned from 3 days ago. I mean, it just happens really fast and really sudden. And today's video is all about really bringing to life what is happening in your brain in these moments where you are actually overthinking and to expose what it's really costing you in the end, because essentially you're putting yourself on trial. As we begin drawing this out, you'll actually notice that even when you put yourself on trial, you're actually not even reaching a verdict, although that is the goal of you doing this, right? To make a decision or to reach some kind of conclusion. You never really get there. Instead, you just litigate, you ruminate, you go back and forth, okay? And in a lot of ways, you're trying to prevent the pain of being wrong again. So you're trying to cling on to anything you can that would justify staying or justify the behavior, the decisions, all the things. And so let's actually do our best to bring this to life. And your boy's going to use a lot of stick figures, but you'll get the point. Okay. So here is your case file. Okay. Let's just say this is classified information. Okay. And this classified information, well, it's just a mixture of all the different pieces of evidence you've put together to really build up some kind of case against who it is that you are dating, you're in a relationship with, or you're just trying to figure out if they're the one. So with this same case, we're now needing to identify a prosecutor and a defender, right? Defense attorney and a prosecutor. Okay. Well, you, okay, are the prosecutor. Okay. That's you. And you're the prosecutor. All right. And what's crazy is who you're up against? Well, yourself. This is also you, a little skinnier version of you. All right. And you are the DA. All right. You're the defense attorney. Okay. For the prosecutor who is looking to defend themselves. Okay. Or is just building an argument against something that is wrong. Whereas the defense attorney, which is also you, okay, is you're putting up a defense. Okay. In a way, you're arguing that you're paranoid from the defense attorney angle. Whereas the prosecutor, you're just trying to build up some kind of case to prove your level of, involvement or their guilt. Okay. In some kind of aspect. And what's interesting is we don't have a judge. There's no judge here. Okay. There's no judge to decide this case because, again, you're never actually allowing yourself to close the case. That's the whole purpose of the judge, to hear everything out and come to a conclusive decision. But in your brain, that's not happening. There's no verdict that's actually being reached. And in fact, okay, because there's no actual verdict being reached and a rule being placed, every new data point just kind of gets added to the same file. Okay, so there's never a moment where there's no more evidence being available to be added into the trial. Okay, and it just stays open. There's no case closed, and it can be open for as long as 3 days, 3 months, and for some of you, 3 years, because this is how long it's been going on. Okay, so when we're talking about overthinking, all right, this is kind of what actually is presented to us with this level of overthinking. And we'll just kind of scroll down here, all right, and kind of draw this out. All right. Because overthinking underneath the label, all right, is just an attempt to try to cling and purchase some type of certainty over the matter at hand. Okay. And if you think it's about being enough, or if you think about it enough, all right, you'll know for sure. And so you just keep trying to find conclusions. Maybe if I ask another question, if I ask the right question, I'm finally going to get the answer. And this is actually what leads to rumination, which is oftentimes where overthinking can make its mark. All right. But you can't think your way to certainty about another person's interior life. Okay. Fun fact, we can't control the people around us. We can't control what they do. We can't control how they respond. So even though that was never available, okay, it doesn't really stop us from thinking that it's available because it's an immediate response that we like to engage in. All right. So the actual skill, all right, that we have to actually engage in when it comes to this courtroom setting is setting an actual verdict date or verdict time, having some type of timer to actually conclude on the matter. All right. But before we jump, I guess, too far into the conclusion, we got to finish out this drawing because you are the prosecutor. All right. And you are also the defense attorney. And this overthinking as you're presenting your case, okay? And let's just say, these are all the files and the papers, okay? Exhibit A, B, C, D, E, okay? And all of those are the files, all right? And this is what we would call evidence being immounted into the courtroom, right? What is the evidence? Oh, the timetables of them texting. Okay. And how different the text messages were when you first met to being 3 months in, 6 months in, maybe 9 months to a year. Okay. Maybe the evidence was all the conclusions that your homegirls came to when it came to you dropping in the group chat. There was a group of them who were not for it. He's playing you. There was another group that said, give him time, girl. It's just the beginning. So we're still in a place where we don't have a decision. We don't have a legitimate place to park it. Okay. And so even though the prosecutor, as the prosecutor, right, which is you, okay, you're both of them, okay, you're trying to build up this evidence from whatever you can see. Okay. You're talking about, and again, just to kind of highlight what this evidence is, we're talking about text messages. We're talking about timetables. Okay. Maybe this is social media. What are they posting? When are they posting? You got time for that, but don't got time for me. Okay. Then there's, the distance in text, the distance in calls. Okay. Calls, FaceTime. Okay. Maybe there were moments, all right, where we were thinking of his tone. Okay. And how something was said caused us to question the entirety of the legitimacy of the relationship. Right. Whatever it is that's in the middle of this that we will look at and we will zoom in on and we will try to find so much nuance in between to build a case for, we'll find and we'll use. All right. And then the defense side of you, right? Well, he's been through a lot, right? We'll be quick to give those kinds of excuses. Been through a lot, and I'll spell through like that. It is what it is. You get it. All right. Maybe, he's just busy. Okay. Maybe we'll give stories where we'll, again, trying to just defend it. Okay. We're trying to actually make room for it in any kind of way. All right. We'll actually keep it open and we'll say, hey, maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe it's my anxious attachment. Right. Like, because truth is, I've heard all the TikToks, I've heard all the channels, and all this kind of behavior just lets me know that I'm anxiously attached. And, you know, this is really what the problem is. Okay. All of these things that we'll give to go against some of the line of evidences that we've come across. And so the question is, well, which version of you do we believe? The version of you that's the prosecutor, or the version of you that's the defense attorney? But again, as we actually circle down into this, okay, the big thing that's actually in the way of this even being believable, right, is the foundation of all this. And that's overthinking. Or what some of you might say, okay, is rumination, right? All of this is centered on this aspect of overthinking. And so, because we recognize it doesn't necessarily protect us, okay, we're recognizing that it's actually causing more harm than good. We now have a decision to make. Right? Even in the overthinking that we're experiencing, there is still a decision to make, because overthinking, again, just doesn't protect you from the pain that you're so called trying to eliminate from experiencing. It just makes you pay for it twice, once now and then later, okay, in advance, spiraling over maybe and again later if it turns out to be real. Okay, so now it might be a maybe, later it might turn out to real. You don't know which one to believe. You're not saving yourself from anything, you're just extending the sentence. Okay. So we're constantly trying to eliminate risk. We're constantly ruminating and we're not being able to get to a foregone conclusion. Okay. So again, the skill set isn't necessarily to find ourselves not in these moments where we're engaging in overthinking, although we want to minimize this to the best of our abilities. Okay. The real skill, okay. The real skill, all right, is actually a verdict deadline. Okay, well, what's a verdict deadline? Well, of course, when you go to court, you realize that there's a verdict deadline where the jury has to have their decision in. Okay, They don't get all day, every day to come to a decision. There's a timeline. Okay. And with this deadline, this is the same way that we can treat it in our brains when it comes to addressing the overwhelming tendencies, the overthinking, all the thoughts that flood in, all the emotions that come in that sometimes we don't choose to deal with in the moment, but we choose to bury, we choose to hide. And then we're looking like the SpongeBob Maniac episode where, everything in his identity, his name, all the mini SpongeBob's in his brain, looking through the file cabinets as everything's burning down. What's his name? What's his name? Right? We're trying to find all this evidence late instead of actually just dealing with the building or cultivation of the genuine skill. Okay, so when worry shows up, we have to give ourselves an honest timetable, time window. Okay, so it's not endless where we'll think about, oh, I'll just think about it until I feel resolved, right? I'll come up with my answers. I'll sit and think. I'll ruminate. Okay, I'll ask everybody else under the heavens who is probably going to give me the same answer, hoping they would give me something different. Okay, what we're actually doing is actually setting a real number. Okay, a real number. So what we need is maybe 20 minutes. Okay, for some of you, it might be a little less. Okay, may not be as much, but we need a legitimate timer that we can actually set. Because now when we say 20 minutes, we're actually taking that 20 minutes to look through evidence, okay, and asking the question, is there a pattern? Is there something that we can find that's legit? Okay, obviously, evidence is not something that we want to throw out the window, but sometimes we're creating pieces of evidence instead of actually looking for what's there. So, is there a pattern? Is there a trend? And if there is a trend, what is it? And if there isn't, it's safe to say that because we have less evidence and we're having more of an emotional intensity, it's fitting into the panic realm, something that we reflected on in previous videos and broke down that you want to keep in your back pocket. Okay. And so then after we deal with that worry, we deal with that doubt, we deal with that curiosity, we deal with that sadness, we book it. Okay. We ask, is it a pattern or is it panic? And after we take those few minutes to look through the evidence, we found what we needed, we're going to leave it alone. Case closed. Verdict entered, whether or not we have full certainty. Okay. Because full certainty was actually never the definition. Coming to a verdict doesn't necessarily mean that we were fully certain, right, about the decision. This doesn't guarantee full certainty. So we don't want to look at it as in, hey, we need to come to a place of full certainty. What we need to do, okay, is actually acknowledge that we're just moving off of what we know and what makes sense best with where we are. Okay. And we're not afraid to get it wrong. We're just going to be honest about what we see. All right. Because the full certainty was never the actual bar. And we see this even in business. All right. Because you can make calls on incomplete information constantly and live with that outcome. If you think about it, there are many times in your business where you don't have all the pieces, you don't have all the answers, you don't have everything in front of you. And yet, because of the flow of the call, because of the experience that you have with the person that you're maybe making a sale to, you're trying to close, the business that you're trying to collaborate with, there's a feeling out in the conversation, there's an understanding of what's desired, and we're asking questions, and we're ultimately going to make a decision even though we don't fully have all the information. Okay. And what's crazy is you live with the outcome. And that's really the goal, to live with the outcome and to be at peace. This is no different. Okay. And the trial has to end for you to be present in life. Because with this being a constant opening case, you're going to constantly reflect on it, constantly come back, ruminate, overthink, and go back and forth in this cycle to constantly try to prove to yourself whether or not this is the best decision, not because of the decision itself, but because you're more afraid of what making the wrong decision would look like to you. I'm a failure, inadequate, and I can't make healthy decisions or trust myself in the midst of decision making. And even bring this to a little bit further picture. Okay. Maybe this is something that'll be a little bit more clear than stick figures. Okay. Again, you're the prosecutor and you're the defense. Okay. You're pointing out something's wrong, and yet you're saying you're being paranoid. And this case file is all the evidence that you've piled up, and you don't allow yourself to close the case. And so we're moving in overthinking. Why did they say that? What did they mean? What's their real motive? We're looking so far into everything that we really don't need that is causing us to create a whole mapped out experience that is actually causing us to lose rest, lose relaxation, and more importantly, not move in abundance. Okay. And we're just hoping that if we find one more clue, ask one more question, we're going to come to the answer. And we're thinking that answers are what we need most because it's a reflection of certainty. When in reality, we don't need to actually find certainty, and finding it isn't through thinking our way through someone else's mind. We can only control what we can control. And what happens is because we don't abide by that, well, we're paying for it twice. Okay. You imagine the maybes. What if this goes wrong? What if they reject me? What if I fail? All the what ifs. And then it happened. And so it almost feels like we brought this self fulfilling prophecy to real life because now it's happened. Now we have a measurement of of heartbreak, disappointment, resentment, shame, all the things that just double down. And now it feels even harder and heavier to overcome. And what maybe would have taken maybe 3 months to overcome with just dealing with the maybes and letting those go, it extended to 9 months, it extended to a year, it extended to 2, 3 years. For many of you, where you are right now, because we're worrying on the what ifs, and it continues to drain our energy, all because we're unwilling to let it go. And what gives us the power to let it go fully is setting the verdict deadline. Okay. That's what you need to do. Set a timer. If it's 20 minutes, if it's 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay. Look it over. All right. And then we're going to actually ask the question and answer from a healthy place based on patterns instead of emotional highs and intensities. What's more likely based on what you actually know, not what you're anticipating, not what you're hoping for, not what you can possibly predict, but what do you considerably see now? And we're going to get to this place of making the ruling. Let's not leave this open, because when we have open loops, our nervous system is retrained that this is okay, that this is safe, that this is something that we can engage in, because we don't, needing answers, it has to go somewhere. There's all this kind of information that's feeding your brain, and that stuff has to go somewhere. And oftentimes, because it has to go somewhere, it's stored internally. We rehearse it internally. We may not ever say it out loud, and it's something that weighs on our state. It weighs on our emotions. It weighs on our mind. So let's close that loop by dealing with it in a moment, nipping the bud and deciding, not on what we're hoping for or anticipating, but on what we know. And when we close the case, we get to enjoy and be present in life. We get to go back to the life that we honestly want to live, and not clinging to the what ifs and what could have been based off of what we were constantly overthinking. Okay. Confident decisions is the goal, not endless doubt. And this is how we're going to recover. Okay. And more importantly, regulate the overthinking tendencies that will move in. Okay. And what's interesting enough is, if you feel like this was helpful, I have a cornerstone video that actually unpacks a lot more of this at a deeper level, and why this identity gap, which is oftentimes what's present in these experiences happening, okay, is actually keeping high achievers like yourself, okay, moving at a default to analysis by a paralysis, or using analysis as a substitute for security. Okay. And you're going to really want to watch that cornerstone video, because it's going to explain a lot more in detail on why that identity gap needs to be exposed, and what you can do to recover the gap that allows you to get to a healthier place, a safer place, and creating relationships from a secure place that are worth protecting. So you want to check that out. It'll be somewhere on the screen, and I'll see you over there.